Kenneka Jenkins was just 19 when she left home that night. No one could have imagined it'd be the last time her mother saw her alive. It was supposed to be a simple celebration, a friend's birthday party at the Crown Plaza Hotel in Rosemont, Illinois. Just some girls, a few drinks, and a night away from the stress of real life. But from the moment Kenneka stepped into that hotel, her path began twisting towards something no one could predict. She wasn't the kind of girl who got into trouble. She stayed close to her mom, took care of her responsibilities, and kept her circle small. That's why her disappearance didn't feel normal. It didn't feel like a drunk girl wandering off. It felt off. And the more her family tried to make sense of the timeline, the more things began to unravel. The hotel footage didn't make sense. Friends kept changing their stories. Hours passed between when she was last seen and when anyone really started looking. The hotel's staff didn't act with urgency. By the time her mother, Teresa, forced her way into the search, precious time had slipped through their fingers. What followed was a tragedy wrapped in questions. Surveillance clips that went viral, theories that spiraled into obsession, and a public that demanded answers. But even now, years later, the truth behind what happened in that hotel's cold, silent freezer remains shrouded in shadows. Because Kenneka Jenkins didn't just disappear, she was erased. Slowly, deliberately, and painfully. It started like any other weekend night. Kenneka told her mom she was going out with friends. She wore a jean jacket, ripped jeans, and a smile that seemed too young for the danger ahead. They picked her up around 11 p.m. There were 4 of them in the car, laughing, joking, playing music too loud. The party wasn't even at their room. It was in room 926, booked under someone else's name. Already, the foundation of the night was built on borrowed time and blurred identities. Hotel security didn't seem to care. No one questioned the group of teens bringing alcohol into the building. No one noticed when more guests arrived. Some invited, some not. The party itself was chaotic, crowded, loud. Kenneka was seen on Facebook Live videos looking out of place, unfocused, like she didn't belong. Some said she looked drugged. Others said she was just drunk. But even in the background of someone else's stream, something felt wrong. At some point, she vanished from the room. Her friends told different versions of when they noticed she was missing. Some claimed they went looking immediately. Others said they had her phone and car keys but didn't think much of it. No one called police. No one informed hotel staff. Hours slipped by. And by the time anyone realized Kenneka was truly gone, the party had fizzled out, and the damage had already begun. When Teresa Martin got the call from her daughter's friends, it was already past 4 a.m. They told her they couldn't find Kenneka, that they'd lost track of her, that she might have walked off drunk. Teresa's stomach dropped. She knew her daughter, knew she wouldn't leave on her own without saying something. She grabbed her keys and drove straight to the Crown Plaza Hotel. It was a mother's instinct, raw, panicked, and burning with dread. When she arrived, she didn't get help, she got indifference. The hotel staff brushed her off, told her to wait, told her maybe Kenneka was still partying, maybe she'd show up. But Teresa knew. She pleaded with them to check the surveillance footage, to look at the cameras, to help her search. They refused. They said they needed a police report. So Teresa called the police, and even they told her to wait, to give it some time. Maybe her daughter had just wandered off and would return. But every minute was agony. Teresa began searching herself, walking hallways, knocking on doors, looking for any sign of her baby. But the hotel was massive, with endless corridors and closed-off areas, and Kenneka was nowhere. The walls felt like they were closing in. And still, no urgency, no footage reviewed, no alerts sent, just a mother, alone, walking through a place where her daughter had disappeared into silence. And with every second, the hope began to rot into fear. Because Teresa knew something was deeply wrong. By morning, Teresa had returned home without answers. She hadn't slept, she hadn't eaten. Her daughter was still missing. She posted to Facebook pleading for help, asking anyone who had been at the party to speak up. The post spread quickly. Strangers began sharing it. Some offered prayers, others offered theories. Soon, people started sending screenshots of Facebook Live videos from the night before, grainy footage of the hotel room, of Kenika in the background, looking dazed, confused, detached. One girl filming wore sunglasses indoors. Loud music blasted, people laughed, flirted, drank, but the comments weren't focused on the party. They were focused on Kenika, on her body language, her eyes, her posture. Something was wrong. People claimed you could hear a scream. Others claimed someone was telling her to shut up. The internet began to dig, frame by frame, zooming in, enhancing, guessing. And suddenly, this wasn't just a missing person case, it was a viral mystery. Social media exploded with theories, some thoughtful, others wild. But all of it shared one thing, a growing sense of unease, that whatever had happened that night wasn't an accident, that Kenika hadn't just wandered off, that someone or several people had done something to her. And no one was talking, not her friends, not the hotel, not the police. The silence was deafening. And every time Teresa reached out, begged for help, begged for the truth, the system closed the door just a little tighter. It wasn't until almost 24 hours later that hotel staff finally agreed to start reviewing surveillance footage. By then, it was too late. Kenika's trail had gone cold. But when the footage was finally released, it only made things worse. It didn't explain what happened. It deepened the mystery. In the videos, Kenika is seen stumbling alone through the hotel hallways. She's swaying, confused, bumping into walls. She appears heavily intoxicated or impaired. But no one stops her. No one helps. No staff. No security. She wanders into restricted kitchen areas, places guests weren't allowed, and then she vanishes from view. No camera shows her entering the freezer. No footage of the exact moment everything ended. Just a girl, lost in a place that wasn't meant to be hers, disappearing behind a wall of silence. The freezer she was later found in wasn't even supposed to be operational. It was in an unused kitchen. The doors were heavy, industrial, hard to open from the inside. The temperature inside was brutal. And yet, that's where they found her. Curled on the floor, alone, cold, gone. Her death was ruled an accident. Hypothermia, alcohol, traces of epilepsy medication in her system, but no explanation for how she ended up in that freezer, alone. And yet, she said, at Transflu, for no answers about who saw her last, no one held accountable. And for Teresa, that wasn't justice, that was betrayal. Her daughter died under a roof filled with people, cameras, and locked doors, and yet the story they gave her had nothing but gaps. The public didn't buy it. They wanted answers. The footage didn't add up. How did Kenika enter the kitchen with no camera capturing it? Why were there gaps in the footage? Why were her friends so quiet, so inconsistent? Online forums erupted. YouTube channels dissected the footage, mapped out the hotel's layout, speculated about secret parties, cover-ups, and organ trafficking. The conspiracy machine spun fast, and no theory seemed too wild. But underneath the chaos there was something real, a sense that people had failed her, that if one person had stepped in, helped her, called someone, she might still be alive. Her friends said they looked for her, that they were scared, that they didn't know what to do. But critics didn't believe them. Why didn't they call Teresa sooner? Why didn't they demand help from hotel staff? Why did they seem so relaxed in their social media posts hours after she vanished? Some said they were just kids, scared and confused. Others said they were hiding something. The truth sat somewhere in between, but no matter how loud the speculation got, the official stance remained the same. No foul play. Just a tragic accident. But for many, that explanation didn't sit right. Not with how Kenika moved in that footage. Not with the hotel's inaction. Not with the eerie calm of those who were with her last. And most of all, not with the mother who knew her daughter and knew she didn't just walk into a freezer and give up. The hotel itself came under fire. Activists protested outside the Crown Plaza. They held signs, shouted for justice, demanded accountability. How could a girl vanish and die inside a public building with security, staff, and surveillance, and no one notice? No alarms, no reports, nothing. The kitchen where Kanika was found wasn't being used. Why was the freezer on? Why wasn't it locked? Why weren't there warning signs? The more people learned, the more it felt like the hotel had something to hide. The management issued statements, expressed condolences, claimed they were cooperating with authorities. But it wasn't enough. The freezer door, when tested, was hard to open from the inside. But police claimed there were no signs of struggle, that she wasn't locked in. She was just too impaired to escape. But again, the footage failed to show the key moment, her entering that freezer. One frame could have changed everything, but that frame never existed. Whether it was lost, never captured, or deliberately omitted, no one could say. And that blank space became the heart of the controversy. In a case built on video, the missing piece was the most important one, and so the questions grew. How long was she in there before they found her? Could she have been saved? Why didn't someone check that room sooner? And what would have happened if Teresa hadn't pushed, if she hadn't fought to be heard? Would Kanika have stayed hidden, frozen in silence, forever? Autopsy results brought more confusion. Kanika's body showed no signs of assault, no obvious trauma. The toxicology showed alcohol and a medication used for epilepsy, but she wasn't prescribed it. So where did it come from? Who gave it to her? Was it slipped into her drink? Was it intentional? Police didn't answer those questions. They labeled it as consistent with impairment. But that word, impairment, couldn't explain how she ended up deep inside an industrial kitchen. It couldn't explain why none of her friends saw her leave, why her phone and keys were left behind, why she wandered alone instead of asking for help. The autopsy didn't settle anything. It stirred more theories. Online, people became detectives. They pulled screenshots from party videos, tracked timestamps, analyzed body language. Some believed she was set up. Others thought she died earlier, and the freezer was a cover-up. There was no shortage of theories. But the truth stayed buried beneath uncertainty. The medical examiner didn't rule foul play, but he didn't close the door either. He said the circumstances were unusual. That was the word he used, unusual, as if that explained anything. Teresa rejected the accident theory. She believed someone helped cover it up, that someone knew more, that someone watched her daughter struggle, wander, and vanish and stayed silent. And in the absence of justice, silence became the loudest sound in the case. A constant hum behind every unanswered question, every blurred frame, every inconsistent word. Media coverage only made things worse. Major outlets covered the story, but their tone felt distant, clinical, incomplete. They summarized timelines, quoted police, replayed the same surveillance clips, but they didn't show the pain. They didn't show Teresa's face when she talked about her daughter's warmth, her laughter, her future. They didn't capture the weight of waiting outside that freezer. Social media, for all its chaos, at least felt raw and unfiltered. Angry, people felt connected to Kanika. She wasn't just a headline, she was someone's daughter, someone's friend, and in her they saw every girl who had ever been ignored, dismissed, or abandoned in a moment of need. The case became a symbol not just of mystery, but of how easily young black women could disappear without the world caring enough to find out why. Activists pointed to systemic failures, the lack of urgency, the gaps in protocol, the lack of empathy, and Teresa, always composed, always grieving, stood at the center, demanding dignity for her child. She didn't want fame, she wanted the truth. She wanted her daughter's life to mean something more than hashtags and candlelight vigils. But the world had already moved on. Headlines faded, protests quieted, and yet the questions remained, frozen in time, trapped in a hotel hallway, waiting for someone to care enough to ask again. The hotel eventually offered a settlement, a civil agreement behind closed doors. No admission of guilt, no acknowledgement of failure, just money. And for Teresa, it wasn't about the money. It never was. It was about the value of a life, about the weight of a daughter lost in a place where she should have been safe. Kenika had dreams. She was working toward becoming a nurse. She had a laugh that filled rooms. She cared for her friends. She helped her mother. She wasn't just some girl in a freezer. She was someone who mattered. And the way her case was handled, the coldness, the delay, the missing footage, sent a message that her life was disposable, that girls like her could vanish in plain sight, that the world would look away. But Teresa never looked away. She fought, she searched, she asked the questions others wouldn't, and in doing so, she exposed a system that failed. Not just Kenika, but every girl who'd ever needed help and didn't get it. The story still haunts those who followed it, not just because of how she died, but because of how easily the world tried to move on, as if the truth didn't matter, as if the silence could swallow everything. But Teresa never let it, and that's why we remember, because justice doesn't begin in courtrooms. It begins with a mother who refused to let her daughter be forgotten. After the footage spread online, public pressure exploded. People began showing up at the hotel, journalists, activists, everyday citizens, all demanding answers. There were vigils in the parking lot, protests in the lobby, voices chanting Kenika's name. The hotel increased its security, but the damage to its reputation was already done. Online hashtags surged. Videos analyzing the case got millions of views. Everyone had an opinion, but no one had the truth. The police, under pressure, released more footage. Hours of Kenika stumbling through the hotel by herself, no one else in sight. But again, there were gaps, timestamps that didn't match, edits that felt unnatural. The people didn't trust it. Teresa didn't trust it. She stood outside the hotel daily, holding a photo of her daughter, asking the same question over and over. Why? Why did no one help her? Why didn't the cameras see more? Why did it take so long to look? Her pain wasn't just private grief anymore. It was public rage. And still no arrests, no suspects, no confessions, just theories and silence. It wasn't just that Kenika died. It was the way she disappeared, the way she was found, the way everything was delayed, denied, dismissed. That's what made people furious. That's what made this more than a case. It became a movement, because Kenika could have been anyone's daughter. And if it could happen to her in a crowded hotel on a party night, then it could happen to anyone. That's what no one could forget. Behind the cameras and crowds, Teresa was breaking. The weight of it all crushed her daily. She couldn't eat, could barely sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw her daughter, alive, laughing, then frozen, lifeless, alone. She replayed that morning again and again. What if she'd gotten there sooner? What if she'd pushed harder? What if someone had helped? It was the kind of pain that rewrites a mother's mind. And it wasn't just grief, it was guilt. Because when the world moved on, Teresa stayed stuck. She kept calling officials, kept asking about autopsy photos, toxicology reports, internal investigations. But doors stayed closed. The hotel refused to accept blame. The police refused to reopen the case. And her daughter's face, once everywhere, began to fade from timelines. People got tired. New stories replaced hers. But Teresa couldn't walk away. Her daughter didn't get justice. She got headlines. She got hashtags. She got theories, but not the truth, not accountability. And as a mother, that emptiness hollowed her out. She'd lost her baby once. Now she was losing her to silence, to systems, to time. Her voice began to crack in interviews. Her eyes grew darker. But still she spoke. Still she held vigils. Still she said her name. Because that's all she had left. The world had forgotten. But she hadn't. She never would. Because Kenika wasn't just her daughter. She was her fight, her fire. And if no one else would burn for justice, then Teresa would burn alone. As the official case remained closed, the internet kept the fire alive. Amateur detectives launched timelines, mapped the hotel's layout, interviewed witnesses. Reddit threads ran thousands of comments deep. Some users recreated the freezer model. Others analyzed Kenika's movements frame by frame, pointing out every possible inconsistency. Did she walk into the freezer, or was she placed there? Why was the camera angle so conveniently obscured? How did she end up in an unused kitchen no one ever entered? Nothing about the case felt clean, and with every new video uploaded, more people questioned the official narrative. Meanwhile, some friends who had been at the party began to disappear from social media. Their accounts went private. Their names faded from public view. Some claimed they were being harassed, others simply stopped talking. But silence, in a case like this, is its own kind of answer. People speculated that hush money had been paid, that someone was protecting someone, that Kenika had seen something she wasn't supposed to. Theories spiraled fast, from trafficking to murder to a party gone wrong, but no matter how extreme or logical they sounded, they all came back to the same thing. Kenika didn't just wander. She didn't just die. Something happened to her. Something no one wanted to say. And the longer the silence stretched, the louder the speculation grew. Because the truth has a way of bubbling up, even when everyone is trying to bury it. And in Kenika's case, the truth was clawing at the surface. In private, Teresa kept going through her daughter's things, her phone, her messages, her photos, looking for anything, a clue, a sign, a name. But there was nothing unusual, no signs of trouble, no fights. Just a typical teenager's life, frozen in time. She'd been excited about a new job interview. She had plans to go back to school. She was in a good place. That's what made it hurt more. She wasn't spiraling. She wasn't reckless. She was just a girl at a party who didn't come home. Teresa clutched onto a stuffed animal that still smelled like her daughter. She replayed voicemails just to hear her voice. And every time she turned on the news and saw a new case, a new girl missing, another mother begging, her heart broke all over again. Because she knew the pattern, knew how easily the world forgot. Kenika's case had gone viral, yes, but now it was buried under newer scandals, fresher outrage. And yet, her pain hadn't aged a day. The hotel still stood. Room 926 still existed. The freezer still chilled its metal silence, but no one would say how, or why, or who failed. And in the void, Teresa screamed silently, daily, because what do you do when the world says move on, and your child's name still echoes through every step you take? You keep saying her name. You keep fighting, because if you don't, then it really is over. The lawsuit Teresa filed was long and bitter. She sued the hotel for negligence, for failing to secure the kitchen, for failing to act when she begged for help, for operating a freezer with no internal safety release. The hotel fought back. They denied responsibility, claimed Kenika had entered on her own, that they had no reason to suspect danger, that everything was within protocol. But the court documents told a different story. Staff admitted they didn't check the kitchen until nearly a full day later. They admitted the freezer had no alarm. They admitted they didn't review security footage until Teresa forced them to. And yet, no one took blame. They pointed fingers, blamed the party, blamed the friends, blamed alcohol, but not themselves. Never themselves. Teresa sat in those hearings with a stone face, listening to people reduce her daughter to liability terms. Trespasser, impaired, accidental, each word chipped away at her soul. Because to them, Kenika wasn't a girl. She was a case, a number, a risk assessment. And for Teresa, that was the second death, the death of her child's dignity. They had failed her once in life. Now they were trying to erase her again in paperwork. But Teresa refused to let them. She wanted accountability. She wanted the world to see the cracks in the system. Because Kenika wasn't the first. And unless something changed, she wouldn't be the last. While the case faded from national headlines, local whispers never stopped. People in Rosemont remembered. Staff at the hotel still walked the same halls. The kitchen, now permanently closed, was like a ghost site. Tourists occasionally asked about the freezer girl. Locals told the story with solemn faces. It became urban legend, but with real pain. A real body, a real mother still grieving. And every so often a journalist would revisit the story, another article, another documentary clip. But they never found anything new. The footage had been picked clean. The witnesses had gone silent, the evidence had been sealed, and the girl in the freezer remained frozen. Not just in time, but in truth. Teresa sometimes drove past the hotel without stopping, just staring, wondering. That building had taken everything from her, but it still stood, still hosted weddings, still profited. And Kenika? She was reduced to a headline on Google, a statistic in a report, a footnote in a system that failed her, and that, more than anything, is what Teresa couldn't accept. Because closure isn't silence, closure is truth. And all she got were walls, cold, indifferent corporate walls. That's the thing about tragedies in public places. They get scrubbed, cleaned, forgotten. But for the families, they never leave. And for Teresa, the Crown Plaza would always be the last place her daughter breathed. No justice, no apology, just frost and questions. Even with no justice, Teresa found a kind of purpose. She began speaking publicly, not just about Kenika, but about all the girls who vanished without answers. She attended panels, vigils, school talks. She hugged mothers who knew her pain. She lit candles for daughters she never met. She became a voice for the voiceless. And in doing so, she gave her daughter something more than justice. She gave her legacy. Kenika became a symbol, a face tied to a question. Why aren't black girls protected the same? Why does urgency come slower? Why are stories like hers dismissed as drunken mistakes instead of cries for help? Teresa asked those questions out loud, and people listened. Not all, not always, but some, and that mattered, because stories only die when they stop being told. And Teresa refused to let silence win. Every year she held a memorial. People came. Some brought flowers, some brought anger, some just came to listen, but all of them remembered. That was the power Teresa built from her pain, not revenge, not money, memory. And even if no one paid the price for her daughter's death, they couldn't erase her anymore, not from the city, not from the fight, and certainly not from her mother's fire. In the years that followed, conspiracy theories kept breathing. Some said the footage was doctored, some swore Kenika was already dead when the party ended. Others claimed she walked in willingly, but someone stood behind the camera. Theories clashed. But one thing never changed. The truth was missing. The official report remained the same. No foul play, accidental hypothermia. But that word, accidental, haunted people because it required you to believe that every single person, system, and camera failed at the exact same time. It asked you to believe that a vibrant, alert girl lost control, wandered alone, opened 2 steel doors, walked into an abandoned freezer, and never came out. And no one noticed. Not friends, not staff, not security, not a soul. That's what the public couldn't accept, because logic fought it, and emotion screamed against it. It's easier to believe something sinister happened, easier than swallowing the idea that no one cared enough to stop a preventable death. In that way, the case became more than one girl's tragedy. It became a mirror, reflecting how society watches girls like Kenika disappear and then looks away. Whether it was murder or accident, the system still failed. And the silence, more than any weapon, killed her twice. Time passed, but the question stayed. Kenika's name still echoed in the corners of forums, resurfacing every time a new case hit the news. Every time a girl went missing, people remembered her. Remembered how long it took police to act. Remembered the footage, the freezer, the mother's cries. She became a silent benchmark for systemic failure. An example of what happens when nobody listens soon enough. Teresa kept living, but part of her never left that hotel. She moved forward, but never on. Her world was now split in two, the life before Kenika's death and everything after. The grief didn't soften, it sharpened. It made her protective of strangers, reactive to stories, tender to anyone who had ever lost a child. And in those moments, she wasn't just Kenika's mother. She was every mother who ever waited for a knock on the door. Every woman who was told give it time while her child's trail went cold. That identity became her armor, and it kept her standing. When the press moved on, when the courts closed the file, when the whispers quieted. Because grief, when combined with purpose, becomes something unbreakable. And Teresa, no matter how exhausted, refused to lay down. She couldn't save Kenika, but she could make sure the world remembered who she was. Not just a girl in a freezer, but a daughter, a dreamer, a young woman who deserved a future. That's what she clung to. That's what she carried. And so, even as the years blurred, the story never truly ended. It lived in candlelight vigils and whispered prayers, in YouTube videos dissecting seconds of tape, in the hallway where she stumbled, in the cold steel where she was found, in every mother who says, "My child would never walk into that freezer," in every father who now watches surveillance footage with suspicion. Kenika became a symbol of unanswered cry, of doors left unopened, of justice delayed until it dissolved. Some called it tragedy, others called it conspiracy, but what it was above all was loss, deep, senseless, and permanent. And no report or footage or medical statement could erase that. The system may have closed her file, but her story kept pulsing beneath the surface, reminding everyone that it wasn't just about one girl. It was about all the blind spots society ignores, and the way we dismiss discomfort, the way we trust institutions that move too slowly, the way silence is easier than action, and in that silence people like Kenika disappear. But Teresa refused to let her vanish. In interviews, in speeches, in late-night grief, she said her name. And that, in the end, is how stories survive. Not through justice, not through headlines, but through mothers who refuse to forget, who carry memory like armor, who make the world remember a girl who walked into a party and never came out. Because memory, when everything else fails, is its own kind of justice. The fight for justice never really ends. It just changes form. After the lawsuit settled, Teresa used part of the money to set up a scholarship fund in Kenika's name, not because it made the pain go away, but because it gave her daughter's name a new kind of life, a seed planted in the middle of a graveyard. She knew it wouldn't fix what happened. Nothing could. But if one girl could go to college because of Kenika, if one life could be changed because her daughter's wasn't, then that was something. Teresa still visited her grave, still talked to her at night, still wore her picture close to her chest, and whenever someone stopped her on the street, thanked her for speaking out, cried in her arms, she saw the ripple, the way one voice, one tragedy, one lost girl had awakened 1,000 others. Kenika had become more than a headline. She was a reminder that Black girls are not invisible, that their stories deserve to be told, that silence is not the default. And Teresa, no matter how tired, no matter how broken, would carry that story to every room that would listen, because that's what mothers do. They don't just grieve, they guard, they carry, they fight, even when the war seems already lost. In quiet moments, Teresa still dreams of Kenika. Dreams of her laughing in the kitchen, wearing her favorite ripped jeans, singing off-key to songs on the radio. Sometimes she's just sitting beside her, not saying a word, just there, alive. And then Teresa wakes up, and the silence is unbearable. That's the thing no one tells you about grief, how physical it is. The ache in your bones, the tightness in your throat, the way your arms forget they're no longer holding something. The world expects you to recover, to be strong. But Teresa knows strength isn't silence. It's standing up when you want to collapse. It's speaking when no one wants to hear. It's remembering, again and again, what the world would rather forget. And in those moments, she doesn't just grieve her daughter. She grieves every system that failed her, every person who didn't stop to help, every camera that caught the wrong thing or nothing at all. And still, she gets up. She answers emails from other grieving mothers. She lights candles on the anniversary. She reposts her daughter's photos so people won't forget her face, because to forget would be the final betrayal. And Teresa has one rule left in her life. Kenneka Jenkins will not be forgotten. Even years later, people still debate what happened. Some say it was all a terrible accident, that drunk kids make bad choices, that no one could have predicted it, that it wasn't anyone's fault. Others believe there was something darker, that someone did something and got away with it, that there's a cover-up buried in those hotel walls. But no matter which version people choose, one fact remains. A girl died alone, cold, undiscovered for hours. And that, by itself, is a failure, one that cannot be brushed aside by technicalities or timelines, one that should haunt every system involved, because safety isn't just about locks and cameras. It's about urgency. It's about care. It's about acting like a life matters, even when the rules say you don't have to. That's what was missing that night. Not just action, but humanity. Kenneka's death exposed that lack, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. That's what keeps the case alive, not the theories, not the footage, but the emptiness it left behind. The space where help should have been, the moments where a choice could have changed everything, and the fact that no one. Sometimes justice doesn't wear a badge or hold a gavel. Sometimes it's a name still spoken long after the headlines fade. Sometimes it's a girl's story, told so often that strangers start to see their own daughters in her. That's what happened with Kenneka. Her story became a stand-in for every girl who slipped through the cracks, every party that ended in silence, every mother who was told to wait. She became a touchstone, a warning, a mirror. And even if the law didn't change, people did. Conversations shifted, hotel policies were questioned, schools discussed party safety, parents talked to their kids differently. And somewhere in that ripple was a small fragment of justice. Not enough, never enough, but something. Teresa didn't want pity. She wanted awareness. She wanted systems to be better, faster, more human. She wanted to live in a world where no mother ever had to beg someone to check a freezer. And while she may never get that world, she helped carve the path toward it, brick by brick, speech by speech, interview by interview. That's what justice looked like now. A slow grind, a whisper that refused to die, a name that stayed written even after the case was closed. The Crown Plaza Hotel never released a full public apology. They offered statements, condolences, and legal settlements, but never an admission of failure. Never the kind of closure Teresa wanted, the kind that says, "We failed you, and we're sorry." That absence echoed louder than any courtroom ruling, because money can't bury guilt, and silence can't erase truth. The hotel kept operating. New guests checked in. New parties filled the same rooms, and somewhere between the walls and ice machines, the past lingered. Guests who knew the story sometimes asked about it, others avoided the topic altogether. But the building remembered. The kitchen where Kenneka was found stayed closed, but no plaque, no warning, just cold tiles and colder history. And every time someone looked away, Teresa looked closer. She'd stood in that hotel, shaking, pleading, crying, and they did nothing. That memory didn't fade. It calcified, became part of who she was, and if the hotel wouldn't carry the weight, she would. That was the price of love, to never let the world forget what comfort cost her, what hospitality chose to ignore, what silence allowed to die. In the years that followed, Teresa grew quieter, not because she gave up, but because the fight had changed. She'd said all the words, told the story hundreds of times, and now she let the story speak for itself. She walked with it like a shadow, wore it like skin. When reporters called, she answered. When mothers reached out, she listened. When anniversaries came, she lit candles. And slowly her grief transformed. It didn't shrink. It deepened, became part of her breath, a rhythm, a pulse. There were days when she laughed again, not because she moved on, but because even grief needs air. Even sorrow finds light. And in those moments, she felt Kanika, not as a tragedy, but as a presence. In the wind, in a song, in a random memory that made her smile. That's the part people don't understand. You don't get over it, you build around it. And Teresa had built something sacred out of ruin, a memory that wouldn't bend, a story that wouldn't fade, a daughter who still mattered, and a love that outlived even death. There's a strange kind of power in telling the same story over and over. Every time Teresa shared it, the words shaped something new, not just for others, but for herself. The first few times, she could barely breathe through the pain. Later, the words came sharper, with purpose, with rhythm, with warning. She told it to lawmakers, to reporters, to classrooms. She told it not just so people would remember Kanika, but so they'd change something, anything. She didn't need everyone to become activists. She just needed them to care. To pause when a girl looked uneasy, to call when something didn't feel right, to listen when a mother said, "She's missing." Because prevention isn't magic, it's awareness, it's attention, it's humanity. And that's what Teresa's story became. A call to care, louder, to act faster, to believe Black mothers when they speak, to treat every girl like she matters, because she does. And maybe that's what justice looks like too. Not just punishment, but protection. Not just answers, but change. Not just looking back, but forward. Teresa told the story until it no longer belonged to her alone. And that was the point. Kanika never got to grow up. She never got to finish school, start a career, fall in love, raise a family. Her timeline was stolen, cut off at 19, and all that remained was what others chose to remember. That's the cruelty of death. It freezes people in the age they left. Teresa still sees her that way. Young, beautiful, full of potential, but she also sees what could have been. The birthdays missed, the milestones lost, the laughter stolen. And every year the ache deepens. Because grief isn't static, it grows with you. It follows you into new years, new seasons, new versions of yourself. Teresa sometimes wonders who Kanika would have become, what kind of nurse she would have been, what kind of sister, daughter, woman. But all she can do is imagine. The world will never know, and that, more than anything, is what she mourns. The future that never arrived, the chapters never written, and the girl who deserved more than a freezer and a fight. The final chapter of this story doesn't come with a twist. There's no killer behind bars, no final footage discovered, no confession. It ends the way real life often does, with questions, with scars. With a mother still standing in the ruins of a system that failed, but also with power. Because Teresa didn't let her daughter's death vanish. She dragged it into the light. She made people look, made people listen, and in doing so, she gave Kanika something stronger than justice. She gave her immortality. Her story lives in classrooms, documentaries, conversations, in every mother who now asks more questions, in every girl who texts her friend when she gets home safe, in every person who sees a headline and reads a little longer. That's the legacy. Not silence, but impact. And while it's not enough, it's something. It's everything. Because no one gets to decide what justice looks like for a grieving mother. Teresa decided it would look like fire. And that fire is still burning. So when we remember Kenneka Jenkins, let us not just think of the mystery, the freezer, the footage. Let us think of the girl, bright, kind, laughing, dreaming. Let us think of the mother who refused to be silenced. Let us think of all the systems that turned away and what it cost them. Let us remember that true crime isn't entertainment. It's heartbreak. It's real people, real pain. And behind every case is someone still screaming into the void, hoping the world hasn't moved on. Kenneka's story isn't over because stories like hers never truly end. They echo, they remind, they warn, and they call us to do better, not just in moments of crisis, but in every moment leading up to them. Because justice delayed is still justice denied, and silence, no matter how quiet, always leaves a trail. Teresa followed that trail, through grief, through fire, through everything, and she taught us that even when the system fails, love does not, memory does not, and truth, no matter how buried, still wants to be found.